Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of SUGTalks. I'm Craig Dale, your host, and together with our special guests we'll take a deep dive into the topics, challenges and opportunities facing SAP users today. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by Simon Nichols, Wellbeing Director at Thrive. So welcome again, Simon. And in today's mental health focused episode, we're going to be discussing how to support the mental health of different generations within the workplace. And just before we get into that, for this week's icebreaker, I thought I'd ask a food-related question. What's the weirdest thing you've ever eaten? And while you're thinking about it, what came straight to my mind was I was down for meetings at SAP and I was staying in Staines. This is many years ago. And I went for a Korean meal. And I'm not sure it was actually so weird, the actual food. It was more the textures. You know, every texture seemed different and really odd. I didn't really know. I can't even remember what I was eating. But the textures were so odd and different with every bite-sized piece. So that would be mine. And what was yours?
I don't know where you get these ideas for. They're fascinating. They throw me every single time. And I remember, I think last time it was cartoons, and I remember that fateful time you did ask me about sport and that sort of the glassy-eyed came over. But food I can deal with. I try and eat fairly ethically these days, and by ethically, I try not to eat things that I get. You know, I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan or anything, but I try now to avoid sort of squid and octopus and I guess more sentient animals. And I'm sure people are right, and I don't mean that nastily, but I sort of, you know, non-exotic foodstuffs. But in my rashless youth, I did go through. I spent a lot of time in Frankfurt. I was actually. I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this out loud, but I used to be a PeopleSoft consultant, and for those of you that remember, that was before it got bought by Oracle and they ruined it. Am I allowed to say Oracle? I don't know anymore. I was based in Frankfurt for 9 months, and I don't know if you know, but Germany is one of the they're the biggest importer of African exotic food in the world. And so, wow. Yeah, I went to a few restaurants and I had antelope and I had beaver and I had ostrich, I had cassowary, I had emu, I had crocodile, alligator. And as I say, at the time, it all seemed, oh, that's fun, isn't it? And now I actually feel really bad. But apparently, these are all exotica that's actually farmed for the most part. So these are hopefully, now looking back on it, wasn't tantamount to the indigenous wipeout of species across Africa. But yeah, I think that's it. But I would never go back there now. Not Germany, I love Germany, but I'd never go back to that exotic food status. So yeah, I think that's probably my weirdest stuff.
Well, a very interesting menu you've just thrown together there. No, not that many of us will probably try it, but well done for giving it a go back in the day. And I suppose that generational element leads us to where we are today. And, you know, before I start, actually, Simon, congratulations on your TEDx talk. I have to say, I thought it was very thought-provoking and moving. So, well done.
Thank you. It was probably the scariest thing I've ever done. And, you know, I've spoken around the world in front of hundreds and thousands of people. And I think that 60 people in Nottingham in deepest, darkest January was one of the most nerve-wracking. But, yeah. And one day, Craig, went over a beer or a nice healthy cup of tea or coffee, I'll tell you the lead up to it and some of the thoughts that were going through my head at the time, and what the amount of practice. Those of you that have been on the SAP UK user group webinars will know it looks like Simon cobbled these together 5 minutes before he starts. I don't. I put a lot of effort into it, but a lot of what I do is very much off the cuff. And yet for the TED Talk, I felt it needed a bit of gravitas. And I rehearsed, I wrote things down, I trialed things. And I would say probably in the TED Talk, maybe 80% of what I practiced actually came through. But yeah, it was very, very, it took me to the levels of my stress and anxiety levels, I can tell you.
Oh, well done. I enjoyed it. I mean, obviously, yeah, you must have been nervous. You forgot your shoes.
Do you know what? You're about the fifth person that has actually used the exact same thing. Your stress levels are through the roof. You forgot your shoes. And actually, that was a very conscious decision of mine. I love not wearing shoes anyway. If I was in an NHS conference, actually, and I did a mindfulness session. Big shout out to Matt Champion there, who's my mindfulness guru. And I asked everyone in the room, this is senior NHS individuals, if they wanted to take their shoes off. And probably about 20% of these NHS execs all took their shoes off. It was fantastic. So I did that because I needed to be grounded. And our neurodiversity director, Shezi, who you've also had on one of these podcasts and met before, she also did a TED Talk. She did a TED Talk in November. We're probably one of the smallest companies to have the most per user TED Talks on the books. And she also delivered hers, shoeless, sans socks. And so I thought, you know what, in solidarity, I'm going to go just in with socks as well. And it felt good. I did enjoy it, but I had my beach socks on. They're like blues and yellows, and so it was really obvious I was wearing socks. But no, it creates a good talking point.
I can imagine it did. Well, fantastic. And okay, just back to the subject of the day, if you like, Simon. How important do you feel it is to tailor mental health support to the demographics of your workforce?
What a lovely question. And I was looking forward to this subject. And again, although others, individuals listening to these podcasts, me and Craig, we just cobble this together. No, this is very well thought out, and we put a lot of education into this. And when we started thinking about that difference, because I'm old, I'm an old git. I'm 50. I haven't taken it very well. And in the SAP space, and whenever I go to connect, I just keep seeing people like me. The old school SAP generation, but then mixed with that, and I don't know if you notice this as well, Craig, is there's these little children running around, and I'm doing a huge disservice to the wonderful graduates that are from other organisations. But they're the same age as my children. They're 21, 22, 23. And I sort of think, well, they've come into SAP in such a different way to the way I came into SAP, and certainly yourself as well, Craig. I'm not. If anyone doesn't know Craig personally, he's not 25. Okay, he's a little bit older than that. And you're right. So when we think about mental health, we've got the demographics, the elderly, the 50 pluses will have a very different view about what support they need, what mental health might mean to them as well, because the 20-year-olds, the 21-year-olds, the 22-year-olds, they've been brought up in a culture that really starts to embrace your mental health and understand it. You think now in schools, in colleges, in universities, there's a huge push to ensure the mental health and support is there. And we're seeing that in organisations now as well. And when we think about the tailoring, we have to think about it. Everybody's completely different. Everyone's unique. So even from a generational perspective, there's going to be different things and different methodologies that are going to work. So we do need, as an organisation, to think about, and if anyone's listened to the last podcast, we talked about wellbeing apps. The younger demographics are going to be straight onto the apps. They understand them, they know them, and they're going to be onto the online versions and stuff. Whereas I guess the older work group, and I'm sort of putting that sort of 35 plus, potentially are used to more face-to-face, hands-on support. So yeah, as an organisation, you've really got to consider the different needs of those different demographics.
Yeah, and I suppose when we think about it, those of us who kind of came into the working environment, let's say in the 80s, etc., moving forward, a lot of us now are leading organisations, etc. So, but the environment we came through is a lot different to the environment now. So we've got to change, and we've got to think about those we're working with in the workplace. I'm just going to kind of throw a saying out there that we will have heard many, many times, and you can't say now, and perhaps it never should have been said, but we learn and we grow as we go on. But that one is man up.
The knife in my heart at that one, Craig. I thought you were going to say a different saying. We'll come back to that one, but carry on with your analogy.
And I think what effect do you feel phrases like this have had over the years?
So it's one of the worst things you can ever say to someone. And I'll give you a little bit of history of the terminology "man up" and potentially still the damage that it's doing as a saying. Because where I felt you were going actually with that particular question was there's a school of thought, and it never did me any harm. We probably heard that one as well. And there's a lovely saying, and you'll know me, you know me very well, Craig, is that my memory for sayings is atrocious. So I try not to repeat the sayings as often as I can. But there's one that I read. I wish I'd wrote it down at the time. And it was one of those things is I managed to get through it and I'm all right. Meaning, why don't you struggle? Why don't you have issues? Why don't you just deal with it and man up? But the beauty of that saying was, do you know what? As a leader, maybe a manager, you're not all right. If you believe that other people should struggle just because you did, worked down to 9 until I was, grew up in a shoebox and, the youth of today. Now, actually, we want to make sure that everyone gets everything they can to be as supportive as possible. Man up came from the terminology potentially originated after the First World War, but certainly it came into being a lot more after the Second World War. And what happened at that time was obviously people came back from that war, and from an NHS perspective or from a medical perspective, we started putting people's bodies back together. But what we were in the early stages of was the mind. And, we can't even begin to imagine what some of those people saw, experienced. So if you think about PTSD, we're talking millions and millions of people having harrowing experiences. And the NHS and mental health services just wasn't a thing back then in the way it is today. So what was an easier thing to do? Man up. Get on with it. Stiff upper lip. Another great one as well, pull your socks up. Isn't that good? You got anxiety, depression, you're struggling to do your shoelaces up, but I don't know what, let's keep our calves warm. I always do a sort of a very sort of, and I'm having to really think about it because you were talking about generational differences, and the term that I always sort of use in this particular scenario is woman up, and we had International Women's Day recently as well, and I just felt if it was women took charge, and we probably wouldn't have any of the problems we have today. Men, we go and sit in a shed and sort of bury our head in the sands and ignore things, whereas women head on. However, on this world of gender fluidity and stuff, sometimes I think maybe it just needs to be a different use of language, different terminology, and the less people we can get saying "man up" in relation to poor mental health, I think the better.
I suppose when we think about that, so this is probably a cross-generational thing, because you mentioned a point there around the language we use, because I believe our words can have a huge impact on others in both a positive or a negative way. So how do you feel the power of language can be wielded positively?
It's all to do with viewpoints, and it's all to do with how we interpret or we communicate our viewpoint, our vision, if you like. And what I mean by that is we all have our stigmas, we all have our discriminations, we all have unconscious bias, and I think we've spoken before about unconscious bias, and that's come around from our childhood, our upbringing. The language that we used in the 60s and 70s and 80s, even from a comedic perspective now, is very heavily frowned upon. And we put the Fast Show on in the background, I think, a couple of months ago. And my youngest, my 17, who's probably the most worldly wise 17-year-old, is like, "Dad, you can't say that. Dad, that's offensive. Dad, that's..." And at the time, it was poking gentle fun at a group of individuals, whether that be women or racial or whatever that was like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so, yes, we know that language has a huge impact, but I think it's about stopping yourself. If you feel, there's this whole, and we hear this wonderful term snowflake, don't we? And woke. And I just think you get a lot of snowflakes together, you get an avalanche. We can change the world, because what these snowflakes and these woke people are people that are wanting to introduce kindness into the world. They're wanting to treat people how they should be treated, to feel that everybody is worthy. And the mental health charities and communities, that's what we want the same support for everybody. So when we think about the language, if before we're about to say it, we think, is this the right terminology? Then it's probably best not to say it. It's probably best to think, well, how can I do that differently? And the world of, I can never remember, is it Gen Z? Although I don't like that. Is it Gen Z? The people that were born post 2002 or 2003, their language is completely different to the millennials or completely different to the baby boomers. And, we've got to learn this, especially as leaders, especially as managers, we've got to learn that terminology. And it's not about not saying anything to offend. It's just about tweaking the language so that you're inclusive. And if that means instead of saying male or female, you say person. If that means that instead of describing a particular gender or something else, we use the they and the them, it's not really hurting people. And I think that's the thing, is that people think it's their right to be able to say whatever they like, and it doesn't matter who gets hurt, because I'm not against free speech in the slightest. I'm just thinking that maybe the language, you don't know what that impact that language can have on someone, especially written. And we go back to, I think we were talking about social media before. You see that post with those words that affect you, And whether it's offensive or otherwise is not us to decide. But the effect of those words, and you see them again and again and again. And they're just little, to other people, they're nothing. But to you, they're like small paper cuts. And every time you see them, every time you hear that, you think, that's actually not working for me. And so, a very long-winded thing there. But yes, I think language is so important. And as business leaders, and certainly working in organisations with a huge diversity that we are now, I think we've got to be very mindful of our language, or at least think about things before we put them down in group-wide emails or we say them out loud.
And have you seen organisations adapting the support that they provide employees through the different age groups?
Completely, yeah. So what we're seeing in both sectors, actually, not both public and private, but both demographics. And I'm thinking here is people over the age of 40, people under the age of 40. That's where my mental cutoff is, because we're seeing what I'm asked for most as a well-being company. I'll put that in brackets there, is neurodiversity, diversity and equality, and menopause. Those are the three things. Why are we looking at neurodiversity? Well, because we want to attract young, energetic, focused, uber sort of multitaskable individuals into our organisation. We want to focus on menopause because we want to give support to the huge demographic of half the population. But we all need to understand that. Male and female and gender fluid all need to understand what that means for our body to go through that huge, huge change. And then we think about diversity and equality. Well, that's just everybody. And we're talking about equity here as well, which is the male, the female, the racial differences, and certainly around support, etc. So those are people are considering those different demographics. But actually, learning about the menopause when you're 22, it's not a bad thing. Learning about neurodiversity when you're 68, it's not a bad thing. We can cover all grounds at that point.
On that kind of, I suppose, that age gap, if you like, do you feel there's any difference in people's willingness to talk about mental health related issues dependent upon their age?
Yes. You will find that the younger the individual, the more open, the more accepting. And this is not just a sort of I apologise if young people out there do struggle to talk about it, but we're seeing more people seek support and more individuals because, and we call it emotional quotient, EQ. You've heard of intelligence quotient, IQ. Emotional quotient is the amount of emotional intelligence that you have, which allows you to talk about your feelings. Our thoughts affect our feelings, affect our behaviors. So if we can talk about how we're thinking and talking about how we're feeling, we're going to change that end result. And the younger you are, the more likely you're going to have mood boards in your schools, which is where you go in the morning, you say, I'm in the red zone, I'm in the blue zone, I'm in the yellow zone, based on how I feel and think. And as the day goes through, if I calm down, I might move around different areas. So when we think about that emotional quotient, that emotional intelligence, we go back to my dad's era. My dad's 75, 76. When I started to become a mental health first aid instructor, he said, "What are you doing all that for? Load of old mumbo jumbo, all in the head." Because that was his upbringing. Mental health was in its infancy. And even now, he does get what I do now, but even then he was like, well, I don't understand it. So when we're thinking about organizations educating, you're going to get, I think, in the next 5-10 years, especially what happened during COVID, where people were more aware of their thoughts and feelings. I think as an organization, you're going to get people choosing to come and work with you based on your mental health support, your well-being. What are you going to give me as an employee, because you potentially want me more than I want you, because I've got all this wealth of people and places I can go to. How many days off do I get a year? Do I have the chance to buy more days off? Can I have a 4-day working week? Oh, and by the way, I need access to Headspace, Calm, blah, blah. And I think you're going to start to see people choosing where they want to work based on that well-being lifestyle that the organisation offers.
And so that, it might be a bit weird giving everybody a hug who comes in for an interview, so we'll take a step back from that for a while. But, based on that then, how can employers encourage more people to ask for support for mental health matters when they feel they need it?
So this is a question we get asked quite a lot. And, we always go back to culture. Do I offer a culture of open discussion, inclusivity? Do I offer, is my door always open? And for that particular point, whose door are we talking about? We're talking about senior managers. We're talking about maybe the leadership team. Does the leadership team, the senior management team, buy into the fact that we need to do something different for our employees? It also needs to be the middle management team as well. Do I care enough about my direct reports and those above me to adopt this open door, culture inclusive language? Because a lot of managers don't get equality and diversity training, or if they do, they get little bite-sized e-learning, which doesn't necessarily embed the learning that we need. And then, of course, you need the workforce, the staff, to believe that it's not a tick box exercise, that the management believe that this is the right thing. And I've been very fortunate enough. I work with a wonderful partner called Green Cross Global, and I was fortunate enough to teach or train a lot of Lush, employees, the high street retailer, and the amount of well-being and mental health support that particular company is putting in place is off the scale, and none of it is cash related. Excuse me. None of it is done as a tick box exercise. Everything is done for the employee. And I think you have to start with a culture.
So we're developing a culture. We're looking to, if you like, really move our culture in the right way. Are there any other key? So we've talked about age. Are there any other key demographics that we need to be thinking about when implementing a mental health support program?
I think you need to find what your end point is. And that's a weird thing to say, because support in whatever form it looks like is an evolving group. But if you're seeing the news that's coming out from the government at the moment, which is we must all have mental health first aiders, wonderful. For mental health first aid support training organisations like ourselves, this sounds like, we're suddenly going to get lots of work. But are we going to get the work for the right reasons? Now, up till now, most organisations have been doing it because they really want to support their workforce. They want to put people in place so they can help support other people. Once it becomes mandatory, what you're going to get is people are going to go out and they're going to get e-learning platforms. You're going to get someone for 5 minutes talking to you about depression. And whilst any education is better than none, if the people at the top don't believe that it's going to work, it will ultimately fail. How many times have you ever gone onto an e-learning because at the end of it there's a question, and all you do is you whiz through it because you want to get to the end so you can ask the question, you can go and do something more meaningful. So I'm not against e-learning in any way, shape or form. I just think it needs to be put in place with a strategy. And we have actually turned down work, and, from an emerging organisation we were in 2020, it's a very hard decision to make to turn down that work. However, the company just wanted it as, literally the CEO said, I've been told I need to get some mental health training. Can't see the point of it myself. But, if HR want it, let's just do it. And I was like, well, thank you. Thank you for trying to, to use us as an organisation for that. But we don't do it as a tick box exercise. We do it because you're bought into it. And so, if that organization has a strategy on how to use and leverage and make the mental health first aiders be more supportive, then you've got a reason for doing it. And I know working with you at the SAP User Group headquarters, you guys have got a strategy, you've got an endpoint, you've got a wrapper that you want to put around all of the staff who work at the SAP User Group, extending that out to the volunteers to make yourselves as supportive an organisation as possible. And I think that without the vision and the dreams of you as the CEO, that could have all gone in a different direction. So I think you've got to have the belief that it's going to work, and you've also got to have a strategy on how you're going to get there.
Thank you. And so if we look at kind of the development of the workplace, the development of organisations, how do you see mental health support developing in the future, especially when, go back to what we talked about earlier, that, maybe we started working in the 80s and it was a completely different environment. But, as employees who've received support when they've entered the workplace, that have been, coming in recent years, as they move into management positions, how do you see mental health support developing then?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of proactive elements being put into place. So what we mean by proactive elements is what we've talked about there: mental health first aiders, education for managers, how to have empathetic conversations, how to handle individuals, again, talking about their gender, talking about their sexuality, talking about their menopause. All things that typically a manager will go, I don't really want to talk to you about that, because they've not had the training. They've not had the training to have those delicate conversations. The same goes with, individuals like customers and customer relationships. Sometimes, if you have an individual who declares themselves neurodiverse, that's a special team within the finance sector that person gets put forward to. And if you're not careful, the person forwarding you onto the special team will actually call you a vulnerable customer. And suddenly you've gone through all your entire life, I'm dyslexic, but now I'm vulnerable as well. So we go back to that language. So organisations, I think, as we start to see more managers educated, the culture of inclusivity being created, as that steps through, those new managers are going to have that emotional intelligence to have those conversations. So when I think of support, I think it's only going to get better. I think it's only going to be more inclusive, because we've got different people with different education, different levels of emotional quality moving into those management positions. That isn't to say that we're going to, all of the dinosaur managers, because it's not that case at all, because we're even educating the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70-year-olds in this as well. We had two individuals on one of our recent mental health first aid training courses, 72. And they loved it. They, to learn all this new terminology. They were both retired, but they just wanted to, be able to support members in their community, in their, their sort of care home, not care, sheltered housing they lived in. But they wanted to know how they could help support individuals in that space. And I thought that's amazing. So I think support's going to change. I think it's going to become more acceptable to talk about it. I think already we've seen it's more acceptable for men to talk about their mental health. As just another little plug for my TED Talk, is that, it's called Big Boys Do Cry. And we have to move away from this, oh, you're a big boy, you don't cry, or crying's for girls. I mean, we can't be saying that terminology anymore. So I think as we evolve and we become more inclusive as a society, I think the organisational flow will follow. I think it will truly be those dinosaur management that can't grasp that their workforce needs something else, and they're actually working them to leaving because they're not offering them the support that they need.
Oh, thank you, Simon. Really appreciate that. And as we come towards a close now, do you have any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think any senior leaders or any learning development directors, HR executives, whatever, if you have an idea, a vision to get additional different support in your organization, please work with a company that defines that strategy with and for you. This is not a plug for Thrive in any way, shape, or form, but get an external independent advisor to come in. Lots of us out there, and actually sit down with them and work out the strategy, work out the end point. Yes, you can train your entire staff, and if it's still not the done thing to talk to your manager about how you're feeling, or waking up and saying, "I need a duvet day. I just need some time off. I need 2 days off." You can't have 2 days off. The whole team is going to fall apart. Okay, well, now I'm having 6 months off because you wouldn't let me take that small amount of time off. So I think if you're going to do it properly. Do it right, because another one of the analogies is, you buy cheap, pay twice, don't you? Sort of, if you're going to get to roll this out seriously, you're going to have to think about it in a serious way. Now, the good news is Deloitte, who are star artois of the very reassuringly expensive, have spent a lot of money delivering the mental health in the workplace, which is where a lot of our statistics come from when we're delivering the courses. And they have said for every £1 that you spend on looking after your staff, your return on investment is £5.36. So for every pound you spend, £5.36 will come back into you through less staff absences, the staff being energised and wanting to come to work, and them not leaving your toxic environment. Where else can you get a 5-to-1 return on investment? And guess what? You're making people's lives better. It can't be a bad thing.
Can't at all. Simon, thank you. I really appreciate you joining us again to share your insights and your knowledge, and thank you for your time. I do really appreciate it. And thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it valuable. If you would like to listen to Simon's TED Talk, then just search Big Boys Do Cry TEDx on YouTube, and you should find it almost at the top. And until the next time, stay safe, stay well, and keep washing your hands.